Okay, so let's move on. The first thing that we're going to cover in the semester is related to invention, or as your discussion on the videos covers, it is called the writing process. So make sure that you follow along. It's important for you to know what the writing process is like, because a lot of the times what happens is the students think that writing is very easy, that it will just come to you as long as you have a subject and you have a pen and paper, that you will be able to write immediately. And that's not the case, because writing occurs in 3 different stages. The first stage of the writing process, or invention, relates to the pre-writing stage. And the pre-writing stage involves everything related to what happens before you write the rough draft. So in this case, you can think of pre-writing as daydreaming, writing notes, and those are rough notes. It's not anything formal. This is where you do free writing. It also involves clustering or mapping, and listing. And please note that this material is covered in chapter 1 of your textbook, so make sure that you follow those notes along. I will also explain each one of these different concepts, the free writing, the clustering, and the mapping, so that you have a better understanding of them. So that's what happens in the pre-writing stage. It's important for you to note that out of the time that you spend writing, in the pre-writing stage, you should spend 84% of your time. Okay, so that's a lot of time. What happens is that a lot of students don't spend any time on that, and they spend the majority of their time in the second stage, which is the writing stage. The writing stage involves writing the rough draft. So once you've done the pre-writing stage, you've done your mapping, you have some ideas down, you have some free writing, you have an idea as to what you want to write about, so that at that point you can go ahead and proceed writing the rough draft. And much to students' surprise, this writing stage does not take a lot of time. Surprisingly, you should only spend about 4%, you should spend about 4% of your time on this stage. So that's not a lot of time. Unfortunately, most students make the mistake of spending most of their time in the writing stage. They skip this stage, and then they move on to the rewriting stage. But really, more often than not, they don't spend a lot of time in the rewriting stage either. So in the rewriting stage, what happens is that you proofread, you do your editing, revising, you may delete paragraphs, you may add paragraphs, and the simplest way of putting it is that you move content around. Okay. So in the rewriting stage, you should spend, based on our math, you should spend 12% of the time. Okay. So surprisingly, once again, you spend very little time in this stage, which is the writing, and most students think that they should spend the majority of their time there, but no, that's not the case. You do need to spend a significant amount of time in the rewriting stage, because you need to be able to proofread, to edit, to catch any errors that you may make. And of course, the majority of your time should be spent during the pre-writing stage. So make sure that you're able to understand that. Sometimes students don't feel that they need to spend that much time on the pre-writing stage because they want to get to the writing of it. Most students don't like English, they don't like to write, so right away they proceed to this stage, and then they think they spend some time on this. But I know from experience that the average student doesn't spend a lot of time in the rewriting stage, and I know that because I tend to find a lot of errors in their writing. So I know that they're not spending 12% of the time. I know they're not spending 84% of the time on the pre-writing stage. The bulk of their time is spending in the stage in which they should spend the least amount of time. So make sure that you get comfortable with this stage, and that's where we will move on to next. I will go over some of the pre-writing strategies that are very helpful for students, especially if you're a visual learner. They will ideally help you understand what you should do before you start writing, so that you are able to spend a significant amount of time on this stage. That way when you write the rough draft, it doesn't take you 2 hours to do it. It takes you 15 minutes because you should spend the bulk of the time there. And then once you're done with your rough draft, then you can spend some time doing the rewriting stage. Okay, so the first pre-writing strategy that you should be familiar with is free writing. Free writing is useful because it helps you explore some ideas before you write the rough draft. And what you do with free writing is you give yourself some time. Usually anywhere between 5 to 20 minutes, maybe even longer, depending on the content of your paper or the length of the paper that you'll be writing. If we were in class today, I would give you 5 minutes to do a free writing exercise, but since we're not in class, I will tell you to do this on your own. So give yourself 5 minutes, and what you do is give yourself a time, 5 minutes, to write whatever comes to mind related to your subject. So let's say I'm going to pick an easy subject just for the sake of discussion. Let's say we're writing a paper on Disneyland and reasons to go to Disneyland or avoid going to Disneyland. So if I were to do a free write regarding Disneyland, I would just write for 5 minutes and write anything that comes to mind regarding Disneyland. It doesn't necessarily need to be structured, so don't be concerned with structure. In other words, you don't have to write complete sentences. You can just write words. You can write phrases. You can write short sentences. But not necessarily paragraphs. And this is the symbol, universal symbol for paragraphs. So if you're not familiar with it, that's what that means. And what you're trying to do, you're just trying to explore what kind of information you know about your subject. So regarding Disneyland, you write anything that comes to mind: long lines, prices, rides, characters, whatever it is that you might be thinking regarding Disneyland. So write that in your free write. So you would do that for 5 minutes. Okay, so that's a good one to keep in mind. And then the next strategy is listing. And you might be familiar with lists. If you use lists at home, you make yourself a list of the things that you need to do. You make a list of things at school that you have to complete, tasks, etc. It's sort of the same thing, but what you do when you do a list is you write in list form information about the subject. Okay, so sticking again with Disneyland, I would write something like long lines, characters. You could write food, rides. You could talk about expenses. You could talk about memories that are made at Disneyland, laughs, children. Okay. So again, you do this in about a 5 to 10 minute increment, and it's just to explore the process to see what you can write about regarding your subject. Make a long list. Then after you're done with that, Then you go back through it and then find the most convincing reasons to support going to Disneyland or support not going to Disneyland, whichever way you want to write about the subject. Keep the subject in mind because next week when we meet in person, we will do an outline in person related to Disneyland so that you can know how outlining works as well. The third tool that you should be familiar with in regards to the pre-writing process is clustering or mapping. And a lot of students tend to like this tool or this strategy because it's very visual. So if you're a visual learner, if you learn better by looking at pictures, then this is going to be a strategy or a tool that you might be very familiar with so that you can start implementing as you start writing in this class, for this class. So let's talk about clustering. So clustering, like I said, it's very visual. And what it is you start writing, you start with your paper, your sheet of paper, or wherever it is that you're writing, and you write the subject in the center of the paper. So in this case, we're talking about Disneyland. And remember, we're writing about reasons to go to or reasons to not go to Disneyland. So you write it in the center of the paper, you draw a circle around it, and then you draw lines, and then you draw, come up with other words that relate to Disneyland. So in this case, I'm thinking about rides. You circle that line. Thinking about the characters. You draw a line around that. Thinking about the cost or the expense of going to Disneyland. I'm also thinking about food. And I'm thinking about, let's see, maybe traditions. Because going to Disneyland is a tradition for a lot of people. They go there for birthdays, they go for special occasions, whatever it may be. Alright, so then once you come up with your major categories, if you will, related to your subject, you narrow them down even further. So in this case, related to characters, the first character that comes to mind is Mickey Mouse, of course. Okay, I'm thinking of Pluto. And I'm thinking of, let's see, Minnie Mouse. Donald Duck. Okay, you could go on and on, naming all of the different characters related to Disneyland. And then we go on to traditions. Once again, you give specific examples related to traditions. So in this case, we would have, let's say that you go there for birthdays. Some people may go there for anniversaries. Maybe on certain holidays. Okay, and you can come up with different traditions that could be related as to reasons to go to Disneyland. Regarding the expense, admission is pretty pricey, I believe. You could talk about parking. You could talk about I believe they call it the park hopper passes. And you could go on and on writing the different examples that relate to expense. We go to rides. One of the most popular ones, It's a Small World for children. Although I think adults like it just as much. Then we have Space Mountains for the thrill seekers. And then you have an oldie but a goodie, the Matterhorn. And a new one is, I think it's Utopia. The food. You have one of my favorites are the churros there. That's reason enough for me to go to Disneyland. You also have that fancy restaurant, the Blue Bayou. there's also different carts, food carts. And then they have other restaurants. Okay. So once you've exhausted your clustering, what you do next is you make an assessment as to whether you have more reasons supporting a reason to go to Disneyland or a decision to not go to Disneyland. So in this case, everything seems to be very favorable for making a trip to Disneyland, with the exception of one. In this case, it seems like the expense is a deterrent for going to Disneyland. So since we have more reasons to go, what you do is you get rid of this expense. Okay? Why? Because you're looking for reasons only supporting your decision to go to Disneyland. That one didn't fit. So then in this case, you have at least 3 reasons to go to Disneyland. And what you can do from here is you have enough content to be able to write a paragraph or an essay. In this case, you have plenty of content to be able to write an essay. And also, next week in person, we will do an outline so you can see how outlining works. I like to do outlines in person because sometimes students don't really understand them unless we do it face-to-face. So keep this subject in mind because next week we'll go over it in detail, and you'll be able to see how you are able to do a cluster and transfer it over very seamlessly into a formal outline, which is what you will be required to do in this class for all of the essays that you'll be writing. So it will be a very important discussion for you to be in that next class. So keep this subject in mind, and we will move on next week regarding outlining, which is also another strategy for the pre-writing stage. It's one of the ones that is mostly is highly valued in the Modern Language Association format, or MLA formatting, because that's what we're required to submit when you write a formal research paper, which you will be doing in this class.